Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. I am your host, Chris Shang, and today we've got Aaron Cruz, who's the Chief Innovation Officer over at UnitedLex. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, man. Tell us a little bit about UnitedLex for those that are unaware.
So we're a data-centric legal services company. So we're often called an ALSP, right? An alternative legal services provider. And really what we're focused on doing is injecting technology into the process of like legal work product creation, that sort of thing. So really speeding up that process, reducing risk, making it cheaper, making it faster.
Got it. And is there like a specific type of companies you guys work with? Is it
Yeah,
like
we do a
market?
lot of work with like Fortune 500s, and then major law firms. But we work from everything from big to small. Like if you have legal issues and you're spending more than you want on it, we're one of the people that you probably want to talk to.
Got it. Very cool. So you got a tremendous background within the legal space. And curious as to how you made the leap into innovation officer. Obviously, it feels pretty organic in terms of what UnitedLex does and why that's the case. But walk us through originally, what was your like primary interest when you got into into law, right? Like what were you hoping to accomplish and what was the precursor to that? And then ultimately, how did you find your niche?
Yeah, it's funny. I think, I've often described my secret to my career thus far as I'm just too dumb to say no. So anytime somebody's like, "Hey, can you do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we could try that." So I'm a trial lawyer by background. I'm a trade secrets trial lawyer. I'm a 2004 law school grad. So, I came out of law school to, be in courtrooms and try cases. And I did that for a long time. And because I was doing a lot of trade secret work, well, I was doing a lot of trade secret work because I'm technical. So trade secrets are a lot of like computer forensics and who took what and where did it go and when did they touch it and that kind of stuff. Um, and so because of that and because of when I came out of school, there was this thing called e-discovery that was just kind of being built, right? Some couple of big cases that came down like right before I graduated, right as I was graduating from law school. And so when I came out, the guy who hired me is a brilliant trial lawyer. He's one of the best trial lawyers in San Francisco. And he was like, look, two things. I'm brought you here to build a trial lawyer from the ground up. Actually, three things. Brought you here to build a trial lawyer from the ground up. Two, the most important thing you need to know is you don't know shit. And the third thing you need to know is there's this thing called e-discovery that's like, people are talking about, and he was in his 60s at the time, so he was kind of like ain't gonna be me who learns this, kid. Like you're gonna have to do that. Um, so I spent, about 3 years working for that firm. And then I got recruited over to a national firm called Littler Mendelson. And I went there primarily as like a trade secrets and an e-discovery lawyer. And then Littler made the decision that they were going to build one of the first e-discovery groups in the AMLAW, which is kind of the list of, your biggest firms. They decided they were going to build one. They sort of saw the trend coming. And so a couple of years after I joined Littler, I got asked to give up my trade secrets practice and do e-discovery full time. So I was really lucky. I was introduced to a guy who became sort of my biggest mentor. He's a guy named Paul Weiner out of Philadelphia. And Paul was kind of this seminal light in the e-discovery space. And so I spent 7 years working with and for Paul. And he really built me into a big piece of what I ultimately became. Gave me an opportunity and kind of just piled bigger stuff on my plate as I could take it. And then in 2014, my biggest client, Walmart, asked me to come in-house and build the e-discovery and the information governance functions in-house at Walmart. And I got really lucky there. I met some great people, and um, I was lucky enough to become kind of the primary lawyer for our innovation lab, which is where we were doing all of our AI and analytics work. And because I was the lawyer who was responsible for the data side of it, I got to spend a lot of time with those guys and learn a lot about kind of AI in its kind of very early modern stages. Um, and then about 3 or 4 years later, I was actually recruited back to Littler as the chief data analytics officer. So Paul brought me back and I built out the AI and analytics practice there, really applying these technologies to legal problems at scale. We built tech that improved practices and thought about how you can leverage data to figure out what happened in a case faster, that kind of stuff. And then after about 3.5 years of that second stint at Littler, UnitedLex came calling, and they wanted somebody to come in and inject AI and analytics and really like deepen the technology prowess of the company, in terms of what we do here, right? Which is a lot of e-discovery, like kind of reviewing data to find the things that matter. Thinking about how we can leverage technology to automate certain aspects of like contract drafting, patent portfolio analysis, that kind of stuff, right? How can you leverage these tools to turn data into information so that lawyers can make better decisions faster?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that seems like being in the right place also at the right time that also matches, I guess, your personality and skill set, right? So, I mean, talk to me a little bit about what that is like, because I feel like you start off as this trial lawyer and like then it's almost like you do more innovation technology than legal. Obviously, legal is how is the, I guess, like the foundational element in how you're using the tech, but it seems like you're now like at least split 50-50 in terms of like what your scope of work tends to be. How did that evolution happen, and like what do you feel, what do you feel about you innately, um you know uh, pushed you into this kind of a position? Because I'm sure there's others that didn't lean into it this way and are still kind of doing what you were doing originally.
Yeah, I think by nature, I'm a very curious
Mm,
person. And the way my brain works is I'm constantly taking things that are not in my kind of current sphere, but somebody's doing something really cool over there, and it's analogous to the kind of things that, like, you look at some of the stuff that like Palantir is doing, and
yeah,
you go, well, I can take those same concepts and apply them into legal, because legal, at its core, there's a fact-finding function, right? Whether you're putting together a large merger and acquisition deal, right? Or you're trying to figure out what happens so that you can go in front of a judge and a jury and tell them a story. There's a fact-finding function. And that fact-finding function is really, if you really boil it down, it's pulling out the nuggets of useful information out of this giant swath of nonsense, right? Finding those needles in a haystack, or whatever, kind of, silly way you want to describe it. So I think like curiosity and the way my brain works is a big part of it. But candidly, I mean, I was just really lucky that I found really good mentors really
mm,
early on, right? People like Paul Wiener. There's a guy at Littler. He's the chief knowledge officer at Littler. His name's Scott Reckshoffen. And Scott is like this prodigiously creative mind, right? He's constantly thinking about better ways of doing legal. And, you I have a friend, Dan Regard, who's in the space, and Dan is a lawyer by training, but he's a lawyer who focuses on computer forensics and like the analysis of data. And so, I basically got to like marinate in these people when I was young. And I had been very lucky to be like very well trained as a trial lawyer. And so that's the lens through which I look at all this stuff, is like, okay, um, as a lawyer, how do I make you more effective by leveraging technology? Lawyers are great at they're like guys at the FBI. They're great when you put the facts in front of them and they're applying law to facts. The thing they're not so great at a lot of times is like the fact finding process, because that's not anything that they're taught, right?
yeah,
And so, getting really good at that, what I found is it made it easier for people to tell a better story, right? To be
yeah,
able to understand what the story was faster. And, in litigation, if you understand what the story is, it lets you make better strategic decisions quicker. And so I was always thinking about these things from my own point of view. Like, if I'm trying this case tomorrow, what do I need to know? How quickly can I know it? And then what am I telling my client about? Yeah, we should try this thing, or no, we should get rid of this thing, or whatever. You can't do that unless you have all the facts pulled together. And so I think, you know, it's an amalgam of all of that. Um, and then candidly too, maybe two other things. Like I'm a bit of an autodidact always, but the thing that law school really taught me more than anything, like law school, people think it teaches you how to be a lawyer. It doesn't. It teaches you a certain way to think. And if you do law school well, the other thing it teaches you is that you can teach yourself anything in really small chunks of time. It
Mm,
teaches you kind of how to learn really, really
mm,
quickly. And so that soup that just kind of sloshes around in my head all the time has just led itself to kind of where I am today.
interesting. Um, and this is like super fascinating for me, but I feel like there's like a very there's like a humility component that you carry, and one of those things your mentors had told you, which is like I think it was like number two, you don't know anything, or you don't know, but it seems like you actually carry that combined with your natural curiosity, but there's a sense of humility towards, I feel like, how you've been approaching each of these different phases of your career path, um, in terms of like, yeah, trying to see how you could insert yourself in a way to generate value where that path to value wasn't necessarily super clear from the get-go. And I'm just curious as to like, what do you think differentiates about you between whether it's like that curiosity or just like, if it's a problem solving component, uh, to like keep trying to find better ways? Because even when you're describing like the fact finding component and when you were a trial lawyer, it's like it's almost like you were trying, you knew that that was the edge that you could have, and it's almost like you made that a mission to then, how do I optimize that edge to not just like service myself, but like service other like lawyers at scale ultimately, which is what you're doing. Um, but how does that kind of all like, you're seeing all these things that kind of like sloshing around your brain, but like, how does that come to then like executionable, actionable steps in your mind of like, okay, these are all the things that could go on. Now, how do I process that into a way that can deliver that value?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I'm a big fan of working backwards.
Yeah, interesting.
And so, I really do think, if you're launching a business, write the press release first, right? Write the marketing information first, because now you're defining what you're
Yeah.
planning for, right? And once you have a defined sort of object that you're running for, plotting the course to that is actually pretty easy for the most part. I mean, there's always going to be decision points, and I'm a big fan of like asking when we're at a decision point, like, is this a one-way door or a two-way door? If it's a
Mm,
two-way door, don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Just pick whatever you think is best. If we don't like it, we can go back through. If it's a one-way door, we need to spend a lot of time thinking before we make the decision because we're making a decision that we really can't come back on, right? So I think working backwards, thinking about one-way doors and two-way doors, um, and as you're working backwards, plotting out what are the milestones, what are the timelines, like what do we need to do in order to get to there, right? If what we're trying to do is, row a boat from Polynesia to the west coast of America, um, you know, what's the path? What do we need to work? We're gonna need food, we're gonna need water, we're gonna need way stations. Like, where are those way stations? Well, we're gonna stop in Guam and we're gonna, you know what I mean? Like, you kind
yep.
of have to like taking an idea and turning it into a functional reality works exactly the same way, at least in my experience. Um, so, spend a lot of time thinking about what the thing should be and defining it and really pressure testing that, working backwards to, okay, if that's where we're trying to go, what do we need to do to get there? And where are the one-way doors in that process? Because those are the spots we're going to need to be really careful. And then I think, the other thing though that's really important in all of that is, well, two things that are really important. One, being really close to your end client and customer. A lot of people build stuff kind of in a vacuum, and then they're like,
Yeah.
ta-da! And people are like, I can't use that. And so, I took a like a course at Stanford online at one point, and it was the Stanford School of Business, and they were talking about how you build product, right? And their adamant advice is you never go more than 3 weeks without putting your product in front of your client. Right. And I think that 2 or 3 week cadence is really important. Like, we're thinking about it like this, and it's going to look like this. What do you think? And they're like, that's dumb. That's great. Double down on that. These colors suck. And being very open to that feedback and asking questions in that process. Well, like, why doesn't that work? Why doesn't that give you what you need? And then they'll explain it and you understand more. And you can refine, 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 refine as you're moving through those milestones in a way that, before you know it, that thing has started to crystallize into a thing that's actually really useful. Um, and the other thing I'm a very big fan of is, like, get it into the wild as soon as possible, like beat the crap out of it. Put real data into it, see where it breaks, like, try hard to break it. Don't, nobody likes to be told their baby's ugly, but getting real comfortable with that, like, that's a really ugly baby, is incredibly helpful. Um, you know, Having a great idea is important, but everybody has great ideas. The difference between, like, a great idea and a great product or a great service or something that really elevates, your whoever you're building that thing for, is execution. And execution does best when you've proof tested it in the wild, you've really punched it hard a lot, and you've taken feedback from the people who are going to be in the trenches using it to say, like, yeah, this is the greatest shovel I've ever had.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I work a lot with startups, early stage, is kind of the sweet spot, all the way to like their first few million in ARR, from ideation to that stage. And it's like what you just explained. I love the fact that that's even relevant at the enterprise corporate level.
Mhm.
And I feel like at every stage of growth for a business, that's kind of the overarching philosophy. Yet it's so hard for people to execute in that way.
Yeah.
I have my own personal belief. I feel like the ego is the killer, where it's like a lot of the times people have their identity tied too closely to the idea.
Yep.
And the market is the absolute truth, right? Like, and there are so many great ideas and so many great solutions out there that live and die by user interface or user experience, right? Because at the end of the day, the end user, whoever is, it's not, sometimes that's not even correlated to whoever's buying the product, right? But it's the person that's going to be using it the most. Are they able to intuitively get from point A to point Z,
Yep.
on their own, or how much of that, hand holding is going to be required? And that's going to be ultimately a function of like retention and expansion and all these other things that happen also after the fact of what a great salesperson can do. Um, but can you share a little bit? I know you used the going from Polynesia to West Africa kind of as like a example in a real world environment, but how about from like a practical standpoint, whether it's at Lex or some other like organization beforehand where you practice that, and also to that point of working backwards. I love that. I always think that's so critical because it's good to put it out there. But how about working backwards by associating a timeline to it?
Yep.
And how do you think about time to create urgency to find those milestones, and defining like when those milestones need to occur by as part of the planning process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can give you like two real world
Yeah,
examples,
for sure.
right? That just maybe make this concrete in a way. So, um, like, here at UnitedLex, we recently rolled out a product. It's a artificial intelligence driven privilege log generator. So, for those who aren't in the legal space, when you're in litigation, you have to produce documents and information to the other side in a process called discovery. They
Yeah.
send you requests that are like, produce every document that relates to XYZ transaction or whatever. Every communication from Aaron to Chris about these issues during this time, stuff like that. Um, and there are and if you have documents that are relevant and responsive to those requests, you have to produce them to the other side in discovery, unless the documents or the data is subject to a legally recognized claim of privilege, like attorney-client, or in a lot of states, like the spousal privilege, right?
Mhm.
Um, so but when you withhold documents under a claim of privilege, you have to log them, and you have to give the other side the log. You're like, here are all the documents that I would have had to produce to you because they exist and they're relevant and they're responsive to the questions you asked, but they're subject to a claim of privilege. So here's what the document is, and here's what the privilege is, right? And you have to explain it well enough that they can look at that and go, oh, I know what that is, in case they want to go to a judge and be like, this isn't actually privileged. I get it, right?
Mm.
Um, Historically, the way those, and this can be thousands of documents in a big, or tens of thousands of documents in a big like case. And the way that process worked historically was a person would read the document and they'd like write a summary of it. And then they would write a one-line description of what the document is without giving away the privileged aspects of it. And they would put that in like a big like Excel spreadsheet, right? Super tedious. People can't do that work for very long with kind of without their brains going numb. It's really expensive, takes forever, right?
Mm.
So when one of the things that we kind of recognized early on was that there was a real opportunity to improve that process with the application of technology. So we built a product that it's a combination of NLP and two LLMs that the NLP extracts the content of the document. The first LLM summarizes the content, and then that summary gets fed into the second LLM, which writes the one-line description, right? Um, I knew that there was an opportunity to radically improve the traditional document review privilege log process.
Mm.
Um, and I knew what the end goal needed to look like because having been a trial lawyer for a very long time, like I know what the output needs to be. And so now the question was, how do we do it better? And the way we started thinking about it initially was, could we build something that would be a quality control improvement? Could we build a technology that would move behind the people and flag things that looked like they were problematic? And then the people who were doing QC on the logs could focus on that rather than the stuff that looked like it was okay. And my view of that was that first iteration would teach us whether we would actually get to a place where you could flip that over and have the people basically be 100% QC and have the machine do the drafting. And so we trained it and we built it initially as a QC function. And then within a matter of weeks, it got so good that it's like, yeah, we can flip this over. And so the end goal was always a better product, but the milestones were the iteration of, can we build a version of it that can dramatically improve quality control? Yes, we can. How's that working? It's great. As its capabilities get better, does it approach a place where we can actually, like I said, flip what the humans are doing versus what the machines are doing? And the processes like that are, kind of real world version of how you do this. And the trick in all of that was putting real data through it,
Mm.
right? And because it's a quality control mechanism, it was people aren't like, well, what if it's wrong? You know what I'm saying? It's like this is an additive quality control. So you don't have the kind of resistance to trying it that you otherwise run into.
Mm.
So, that's one example. And then a second example, when I was at Littler, one of the first practices that I was asked to help sort of recharge was Littler's pay equity practice. So pay equity is, gender and like racial disparities that result in people being paid, less than their majority counterparts. And there are laws against it in every state. And particularly in the wake of Me Too, it became a very important practice that a lot of corporations were very concerned about. But the way that practice traditionally operated is you took kind of the pay mechanism data that the clients had, and you took their pay data and you did statistical analysis inside of an Excel spreadsheet, and you handed them an Excel spreadsheet that was like, you have a problem here and here and here, right? But if you're, talking to the middle of HR, they usually aren't deep in statistics. An Excel spreadsheet is very boring. You need to be able to like understand what's in there, or it's what I call drawerware. Open the drawer, put it in, close the drawer, never look at it again. Not particularly valuable. We realized that there was a way to give that information in a much more impactful way. So we built a SQL backend, some Python scripting, and an interactive dashboard. And the dashboard, you could change the inputs on how the company was paying to figure out what mix resulted in the best result for all of the employees in the company. And because it was immediately intuitive of we've got a problem here, we need to look at that, like these are great, don't mess with them. It made that practice much more impactful for the end client, and that practice went from talking to kind of the middle of HR to advising boards on these compensation issues because the information was so much more easily distilled and understood.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. That definitely connects a lot more of the dots together. As we're kind of rounding up on time, I'm curious as to like where do you see, like, with all the new advent in technology, specifically around AI, like, is the next opportunity? And I'll bring up a scenario of a startup that I came across that was trying to solve for this. I don't know what ended up happening, but they were looking at collecting case data as it pertained to a specific judge, and then looking at case history of that judge and understanding certain biases that it might have had using AI to then help, the counsel on either side potentially of like arguing a case one way or another. I don't know what I forget if they ran into some kind of like bottleneck or like, issue around that, but I don't know if that's anything that's pertinent to you guys, or also like if you think about where the next gaps are in terms of like helping to create more efficiencies within the legal system.
Yeah, so the biggest problem that a lot of the guys who are trying to build those kind of models
Yeah.
face is that the number of cases that actually go to trial, that actually end up being tried in front of a judge, I think it's less than 1/2 of 1% of
Oh,
all
wow.
cases. The vast majority of cases settle. And those settles unless they have to be confirmed by a judge or confidential. So what they're dealing with is a very small and slightly skewed sample set
Makes sense.
to really do that kind of prediction work really well around cases. Not so much around judges, you can do that, but around the cases themselves, you really need the internal data of the companies who are the litigants, because you need, a pretty large swath of data in order to build those prediction engines with any accuracy. But that's super doable and it's very, very valuable if you get it right. For me, like I think those kinds of things are very interesting and I think they're additive. But I think the bigger sort of issue or the bigger opportunity is legal has always been kind of a laggard when it comes to technology. Lawyers are conservative, we work off a concept of precedent, change averse, right? A lot of lawyers go to law school because they don't like math. So, this is, and not all, but a lot of lawyers go to law school because they don't like math. Um, but with what technology is doing right now, right? We're living with the worst AI we're ever going to have.
Yeah.
And even if progression is only linear, which I don't think it will, especially with, some of the stuff that like Claude is doing around
Yeah.
agentic technology, right? You're going to see this exponential growth in what LLMs and then ultimately LLMs with a generative layer are able to do. And I think it's a tremendous challenge and a tremendous opportunity for the legal profession. The ability to take information, feed it into an LLM, have it generate a really good first draft of a motion or a brief, right? There are spaces in the law where that's completely doable today. The space in which that's doable is going to grow a lot over the next 3 to 5 years. And lawyers that figure out how to leverage that and how to wrap a new business model around that, because you can't charge by the hour when you're doing that or you're just eroding revenue, right? It's that kind of private equity mindset of we're going to do things in a more automated way. The human component is the important component because it's taking kind of this raw output, making sure it's right, perfecting it, putting it in front of a judge. You're the one telling the story, right? That piece is that's a huge opportunity. And then wrapping a new business model around it where you say, you know, we're not going to charge by the hour. We're going to break this apart. I'm going to charge you a flat fee to build that motion. I've got a margin built into it, really thinking about it the way that like venture capital and private equity think about business. That I think is the opportunity for law firms and ALSPs right now. And I think the next, 5 to 7 years are going to be extraordinarily interesting in this space.
Yeah, awesome. You got my gears turning. So anyways, this is super interesting, awesome conversation. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to do it. And yeah, happy to share this back with our audience and send it back to you as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. It was really gracious of you to invite me on it. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, really intriguing.